Welcome to Clemson's Finest Series. I'm Will Vandervoort as we kind of come with a special one today as we get you set for the Clemson-South Carolina game, which will be next week at Williams-Brice Stadium in Columbia. Sitting here to my left is former Clemson administrator Bill DeAndre, Billy D as we all like to say. And Bill has worked with, for years, worked with Coach Ford under his staff. Worked in the athletic administration, Vickery Hall, did all that, and then, worked in the athletic department as well with Terry Don Phillips, is basically his right-hand man there for all those years. Terry Don was there, and so Bill, thanks for joining us. We do appreciate it, man. It's great to have you here in studio.
Thank you, Will. I look forward to it.
All right, so, you're one of the guys that know, I like to say, you kind of, to me, when you were there with Coach Ford, you were there during a part where I thought the South Carolina-Clemson series was at its most competitive because they had Joe Morrison there, and that Black Magic teams, all they had. Can you talk about the rivalry, what it was like then?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back through the '80s, and I certainly can't recollect each one, but I think it was we won one, they won two, we'd win two, they win one. During the age, there were always close games, 20-7, 21-13. I remember losing one time, I think it might have been in '82, it was 22-21. And I think the importance of that time was the emphasis on recruiting. It's a little different today because of the national exposure that Clemson has gained through their success, but that was always a game that we wanted to win in order to kind of set the stage for recruiting.
You come from an area, Western Pennsylvania, and so when you came into this area, and what was it like to learn about the Clemson-Carolina rivalry and why it was so important?
Well, coming to Clemson, I think you're right. I mean, prior to Joe Morrison, you had Jim Carlin, I believe, who was very successful there, year in and year out. And, I can remember the fire ant defense. I can remember them chanting Rodney.
Yeah.
It was a tense time. I think it's always a tense time when Clemson plays South Carolina, despite the record. And also, it's probably one of the oldest rivalries in college football.
You're correct.
So it was embraced as something significant. I mean, I think the blood drive started back in the '80s with the competition. So it really is something that is a nucleus to this state. And there is, I think it's a civil rivalry, I hope, but it's certainly been a healthy rivalry over the years.
Was it something you had to, somebody coming in that wasn't from this area that you kind of had to, I don't know, maybe Coach Ford, because I know you came in as a grad assistant first and all.
Right.
Did Coach Ford kind of like instill that in you guys that, okay, you got to understand why it's important, we have to win these recruiting battles, why we have to win this game?
He did. I think one of the things that Coach Ford emphasized to our staff is, we recruited Virginia, North Carolina, we recruited Western Pennsylvania, even in New Jersey and New York, of course Georgia and Florida and whatnot. But one of the things he always emphasized is making sure that you own the state. Not just that you got kids from South Carolina, but that the South Carolina kids really knew what this tradition and this game meant. And I think he always felt if you got a lot of people from a lot of different places, they would lose the meaning of that, the emphasis on that game.
Can you, remember earlier or later in your career as a coach, a game that kind of stood out to you? You say that what happened, and maybe I can tell you the year. I'm good at that. So
I think it was. Well, I remember in '89 we beat them 45-0.
Yeah.
That was my last year, and I remember Junior Hall. I think he had a career day of probably 140 yards rushing or something as a fullback, and it just seemed like anything we did, we couldn't do wrong. And But I do remember my first year here as a grad assistant, I believe in '82, we lost 22-21, and I think we had 12 men on the field and had a penalty.
That was '84.
Was it '84?
That was their Black Magic year.
Well, you got to remember, I'm a little older, so
Hey,
my memory.
I understand. That's why I said you say those things, and I'll probably be able to tell you.
Okay, '84.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And
That's when Mike Holt held the ball out in front of
that's
William
right.
Perry.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that sticks out in my mind, and I think that the next year we won, and then 2 years after that, I think they beat us back to back, and then of course in '89 we beat them pretty good.
The '84 game sticks out as because again, unfortunately Clemson lost it, but 21-3 lead you guys had, and they were known as a team that came back all the time. So you guys knew they would have that. They would do that in that game. But like you said, that last drive, it looks like you guys get the stop, and then there's a 12th. So who was in charge of making sure there's 12? It wasn't you, was it?
No, it wasn't me. That was defense. It wasn't me.
That's good.
And I'm not sure the coach made a mistake or a player just, ran on the field or what. I can't remember exactly what happened, but it was a costly mistake.
Yeah. So in 1989, though, that I remember because we'll go back a couple weeks ago. Clemson played Wake Forest, and they ended. NC State. So they break out the orange pants when nobody thought they would. And that 1989 game was the first time Clemson wore orange pants on the road.
That's right.
Can you talk about what that was like and how you guys surprised the players and how excited they were?
If I recollect, we warmed up in white pants.
That's correct.
And when they went out to warm up, the managers and all that hung the orange pants in the locker room. And Coach Ford, he was unique in a lot of his motivations. He knew exactly how to touch that nerve to get people. And when they came back in, to get dressed to go back out, was a lot of hooping and hollering and excitement. And, a lot of times in college football, games are won on emotion. So it was exciting.
I remember Sparky Woods after the game said that they knew they lost it when they heard all the hooping and hollering going on in the pregame. They're like, "Oh boy, what's going on?" Then when he said he saw the orange pants, he's like, "Yeah, it was over."
Yeah, they were special. They were special.
A player or two from the rivalry, either side, that really could have stood out during your coaching years in this game.
At South Carolina
or Clemson, yeah.
Two really good corners we had at that time during the '80s, Donnell Wolford and Delton Hall. And when you have athletes at that caliber, Brother Oliver was our defensive coordinator. I think, you can scheme things by playing a lot of man coverage and doing a lot of blitzes and all that. But when you have two first-round picks at that level, those guys stood out at me. And, of course, we had a pretty darn good offensive line in the '80s with Jeff Nunemacher and Frank Julius, Ty Granger, John Phillips, who was the Outland Trophy winner. The Jacobs Blocking Trophy winner. Jeff Back, Eric Harmon. We really had some really good players up front. And, of course, we had some good tailbacks, too, with Terry Allen and Kenny Flowers, Stacy Driver. We had Terrence Flagler. We really had some good players, and we were very fortunate to have guys that were committed, that wanted to win and would do whatever. And we had tough practices. Not to say they don't have tough practices today. And again, we had 95 players too, so you could do a little bit more with 10 more people on the team, and that I think that makes a difference as well too.
From your standpoint, as someone who's been a part of the rivalry since 1982, how have you seen it change? Like, does it seem like it's the same intensity that it was maybe all those years ago?
I guess now I've been away from Clemson as an administrator. My last year was 2013. I think Clemson certainly has moved and elevated itself a little bit higher in the national spotlight than South Carolina. And I think with Dabo recruiting nationally, it's made less of an impact on the state recruiting. And that was the big thing back then. We wanted to win the game. We wanted to influence recruits. We wanted people to come to Clemson. But now we've got kids from California, New Jersey, Maryland. Not that we didn't have those kids back then, but I don't think we ever had anybody from California. But I think with Dabo as the leader right now, his sincerity, his authenticity, what he has done to put together a coaching staff, his vision. He's the complete coach. He's got plans, what he wants to do offensively. He knows what he wants to do defensively. He's hired, really good coaches, recruiters, and he sells a program that is not only going to make you a better football player, but it's going to make you a better individual. And we've got a significant number of players that are going on to the pros, but in the last Orange Experience magazine, Tim Beret wrote a pretty good article about some of the players that haven't gone on to the pros, but are CEOs of companies, moving up the ladder in various organizations, and I think that that all reflects back to your experience as an athlete. Dealing with adversity, being on a team, understanding persistence, hard work, discipline, and I think that's one of the most rewarding things that that you're able to look. I always kind of my vision goes back to seeing when I was recruiting or when I was in the student athlete enrichment programs, of seeing those kids when they came in as freshmen, and then now to see them where they have matured as business people, teachers, principals, and then they have kids that are going to school here. So, that's an exciting thing to see that entire development.
That's an amazing thing because you get to watch them grow from kids to men and women, right. And that's amazing. You mentioned Dabo there and how he kind of has built this program. You were there at a big moment in his tenure when, let's just go to the Clemson-South Carolina game, probably the lowest point of his career. They lose 29-7 there in 2010. Everybody kind of is not happy. Some wanted them gone. But Terry Don stayed behind them, stayed true to him. You were there. You knew what the conversations were. Talk to me about from the inside what it was like and how much Terry Don did support Dabo.
Well, I remember after the South Carolina game, Terry Don and I always stood on the sideline. And Terry Don told me he wanted me to meet him in Dabo's office after the game. And of course, Terry Don was, he was somewhat of a reticent leader. He knew what he wanted to do, but he was always kind of behind the scenes, more or less.
Like the shadow.
Orchestrate, yeah. And I thought to myself, oh Lord, I didn't know why he wanted me to meet.
Yeah.
And so we went into his office, and I heard Kathleen say, Billy D and Terry Don are in your office. And I'm sure Dabo probably felt the same thing, that this was it. And Terry Don didn't mention anything to me. And when Dabo came in, he told Dabo, he said, sit down. He said, I want you to listen to me. He said, we're going to get through this. He said, there's a lot of people that were disappointed because I hired you. You weren't a name coach. You weren't even a coordinator. But he said, I want you to know that I have your back 100%. And he said, we're going to get through this. And he said, you get with Billy D and tell him what you need, and, we're going to work this out. And I think the next day Dabo came with like 2 pages of things. And I took him to Terry Don, and Terry Don said, "Oh, well, maybe I shouldn't have said all that." So, but yeah, and I think I think Terry Don is a man of integrity, and I think that it would have been easy, and probably the consensus of the Clemson people at that time was, well, they made a mistake. You know, this guy's too young, he couldn't do it, we got beat pretty good. But Dabo, Terry Don did say to Dabo, he said, I'm more convinced now that you can be this coach here than I was when I hired you. And I think that motivated Dabo, you know, to have somebody with that conviction at that time. Because in this day and age, that doesn't happen much, you know. So Terry Don needs to be commended for his insight and supporting Dabo and keeping him on track. So.
And now we look at where they're at now, and it just goes to show that maybe, you know, and we've seen it already out there with Willie Taggart getting let go after just 21 games, Chad Morris, former offensive coordinator here, getting let go after 22 games at Arkansas. You know, are we jumping the gun a little bit too early in the day? And do people need to take back and look and say, okay, how did Clemson do it, considering Clemson's right now the most successful program in the country? How did Clemson do it? And kind of start taking Clemson's way of doing things and being patient.
Well, I think you know, fans, alumni, universities, they want to win now. And I think we are a little impatient. You know, you can have coaching changes, but to me, I think it all reflects back to the support you get, which we have IPTAY. And, you know, it's always been a robust organization. You can kick the can down the road and get another coach, but I think it really is what's behind that. Y'all remember Tommy West, and I had the opportunity to visit Rick Stockstill this year, and had a long conversation with Tommy in the lobby before they played Duke. And Tommy made a pretty good quote. He said, you know, Billy D, in this business, it's who you follow and who your leader is. And I think in Chad Morrison's case, you know, he followed a coach that kind of had a different philosophy in running the ball. And so I wish that Arkansas, I know Chad's a good coach and I know he's a good teacher. And I wish that they would have given him a little more time. You know, I don't know Willie Taggart, and I don't know about that situation there, but, you know, you've got to, you know, if you look at Clemson, we have very few penalties. We have very few off the field issues. Our graduation rates are, you know, unbelievable. So I think it starts with that kind of discipline. And that emanates from a coach that cares, that has sincerity and authenticity. Because I think today's kids, you have to show them that they're a priority and that we care about them.
Speaking of that, you're a guy that when Coach Ford stepped down, however we want to say it.
Got me into administration.
got you into administration. You know, you went in and you took over the Vickery Hall there and led it to an era of kind of to where we've seen it gone now. Now it's no longer at Vickery Hall. It's
Right.
over in the West End Zone now where they do it. But the athletic enrichment program with the university and the student athletes, how did you build that? And then, like you mentioned earlier, you saw these young kids grow from kids to now men and women where their daughters and kids, sons are coming back and coming to Clemson.
Well, you know, Will, I grew up my father was born in Italy, and my mother came from Italian parents as well. And I think my dad went to 10th grade and my mother went to 8th grade. She was the oldest of 9 kids and her father died. And so, you know, I didn't really have the greatest direction. I had love and support, and, you know, I grew up in a small coal mining town, and, you know, I knew what needs were. And, but I kind of could identify with those at-risk kids. So when I got into Vickery, I knew myself when I went to college, to Indiana State, you seek out help, whether it's a girl that sits next to you in class and you take, use her notes, or you find somebody that, understands it well. And it was something that I felt, I think coaching was the best job that I ever had, but Vickery Hall was the most rewarding job that I ever had, because you could see these kids who probably came to Clemson with the goal to play professional football or basketball or whatever, but to see them kind of gain confidence and grow and become an independent student where they didn't need that, they got it. And that was really a rewarding experience for me.
And at the time, Clemson, when you started Vickery Hall, Clemson was one of the few in the country that kind of had this kind of program. Am I correct on that?
It was. Well, actually, I think there were, I think Clemson dated it and didn't marry it. But when they built Vickery Hall, they really did marry academic support. And we were the first standalone facility in the country, meaning that, our academic tutoring wasn't at the Coliseum or underneath the stadium. It was a standalone facility built, supported by IPTAY and built for the student athletes. And it wasn't just for the at-risk kids. It was for somebody that might have wanted to go on to medical school or pharmacy school and wanted to maintain a B average. They could use a tutor to help them in maybe some rigorous classes.
And during those times there when the success wasn't on the football field, how important was that to have something at least to stand on for a university to be proud for, as you guys are trying to build your way back to where you were in the 80s?
Well, I would say at that time, it was certainly something that we sold as a recruiting tool. When we did our recruiting presentations, and I think it's the same today, when Steve Duzan, who's the director, and the advisors over there, they do a tremendous job of kind of convincing parents that, we're going to certainly support him academically. And I always said this: we're going to do everything we can except one thing. We're not going to do it for you. And that way we protected the integrity. And I think I'd be remiss not to mention this. Bobby Robinson hired me, retained me, and then within about 6 months moved me to Vickery Hall. And I really didn't cut my teeth on academics. But I had a committee, was composed of Dr. Cecil Huey, who was our faculty rep, Larry LaForge, several other faculty members, that I think some of the tutoring criteria and policies that are in place today were put in place by the faculty. And we wanted to do things right, whether it was homework assignments or what. We didn't want somebody doing it for them. And I think to this day, knock on wood, I don't think we've had any unethical situation in Vickery Hall.
Yeah, and that's something to be proud of in this day and age, when you see the situation happen at North Carolina, and then other places, Ohio State. We've seen some issues with their academics, and so it's been something for Clemson to be proud of. And it seemed like everybody loves Clemson's football tradition, but it seems like the academic part of what you guys have done in the athletic department has been also something that you guys have hung your hat on now for almost 25 years.
Right. I mean, I think if you can tell somebody they have the opportunity to play in front of 80,000 plus people, national television, they can come here and get a degree and have the opportunity to play in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. I think that's certainly what parents want to hear. It's what 18-year-olds want to hear that are making the decision. And I think Clemson has done a great job in that.
As we look at this rivalry now moving forward, how do you think this rivalry, or do you think it is underappreciated, the Clemson-South Carolina rivalry that is, compared to other rivalries around the country?
I would say you make a good point. When you talk about rivalries, I think you think of, Alabama, Auburn, Oklahoma State, or maybe even Oklahoma, Nebraska when I was growing up. It was played on Thanksgiving Day, I think we've kind of lost a little bit of it, and particularly as I previously mentioned, I think it's one of the oldest rivalries in college football.
Correct.
And you know, we've had some things tarnish it too. We had the fight.
Yep.
You know, what was that? 2003 or something
Four.
like 2004. I'm getting better.
You're getting better. You're getting closer.
But you know, we've had some things that tarnished it, and I mean, I don't think that it's. I think it's something that's always going to be embraced by this state, and you know, I mean, I think rivalries are healthy. You know, they're fun. They're something to tease your office mate about and stuff like that. But you know, I know this is. Will this be 5 years in a row, or
Going for 6.
Going for 6.
Which will be the first
And
time.
I remember I was on the other end of that 5 years too.
Yeah, you were. Nobody liked that, right? That was a weird time at Clemson. I admit, I was there too, working for you guys most of that time. It was a weird kind of era.
It was Spurrier, and you know, we just couldn't seem to get over the hump back then. So.
It's crazy now, but now, you know, you look at it and Clemson's going for 6, which would be the longest streak since 1934 through 40 when Clemson won 7 in a row, which is the longest in the history of the rivalry. So, and I know Dabo would love to get number 6 for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
And if people don't think Dabo Swinney doesn't think this game is important, you don't know Dabo Swinney, because he relishes in this game. He really looks forward to it, doesn't he?
Every game is important to Dabo.
Yeah, well, that's
this
true.
one is important, more important.
This absolutely. Well, Bill, thanks so much, man, for coming
Thank
and
you,
talking
Will.
about the rivalry in Vickery Hall and all that you've done at Clemson. We do appreciate you. I know the Clemson people do, man.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing you around the valley and around Clemson, as you always are. I know you pop up still every
Absolutely.
now and then. So appreciate you, man.
I love Clemson.
And of course, we could have gone on. Bill's a fellow Steelers guy like me, but we didn't do that to you guys. So be thankful that we didn't, because we could sit here and talk probably for another hour on the Steelers. So
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Bill.
you, Will.
Stay tuned to the Clemson Insider. We'll have more coverage for the Clemson-South Carolina game as we get you ready for the 117th edition of the Tigers and Gamecocks.